They say everyone has secrets, but some secrets are not kept, they're buried. So deep inside the mind that even the person carrying them pretends they don't exist. These are not the fantasies you talk about with friends or laugh off with a smirk. These are the ones that arrive in dreams, distort your memories, and make you feel something you can't explain. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of the psyche that hides everything society told you was unacceptable to feel. Every man and woman carries it. And it's not about lust. It's about power, about the desire to surrender it, to hold it, to destroy it, or to be destroyed by it. The forbidden fantasies aren't dirty because they're sexual. They're forbidden because they reveal truth. And truth is always dangerous. The first forbidden fantasy begins in the tension between control and surrender. It's the desire to be taken, or to take, without question. The civilized self denies it. You walk through life politely, kindly, obeying rules, managing impressions. But inside you, something primitive never agreed to this arrangement. Something still wants to be consumed. You've felt it in moments when your heart raced for someone you shouldn't want. When a look, a silence, or a slight act of dominance stirred something that made no logical sense. That was not lust. That was your shadow asking to be seen. Jung believed that repression doesn't kill desire. It disguises it. What you think you've overcome, you've only buried. That's why the quietest people often carry the loudest cravings. They're not pure. They're contained. And containment always creates pressure. The more you try to appear good, the more your shadow waits, watching for the moment you slip. And when it finally shows up, it doesn't ask for permission. It appears as a dream where you're powerless, yet free. As a thought that feels like sin, yet strangely honest. As an attraction that violates your rules, but feels like home. The first forbidden fantasy is not about pleasure. It's about the loss of control. The human mind wants to break its own chains, to feel something raw enough to remind it that it's alive. That's why so many chase danger in love. They confuse chaos for passion, because chaos feels closer to truth than calm ever could. When you meet someone who triggers this part of you, you call it chemistry. But it's not chemistry. It's recognition. Two shadows meeting in the dark. You can't hide from that. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's what this fantasy does. It hides in your unconscious and turns into patterns. You keep falling for people who hurt you. You keep testing love until it breaks. Because deep down, part of you wants to see how far you'll go before the illusion of control shatters completely. Every forbidden fantasy begins with the need to feel powerless. And that's why it scares you. Not because it's wrong, but because it's real. You were never taught to face the side of you that wants to lose control. Society raised you to dominate, to achieve, to stay composed. But desire doesn't follow rules. The more you try to suppress it, the more it chooses to express itself in ways you can't predict. Through your body, through your eyes, through the silence that lingers after a touch. That's where the first fantasy lives. In silence, in tension, in the unsaid moment before surrender. If you've ever felt the urge to give yourself away completely, to trust someone enough to lose your self-control, you've already touched the edge of it. It's not about submission. It's about recognition. You want someone who can see through your facade, who can reach the version of you you've kept hidden, even from yourself. That's the first forbidden fantasy, to be fully known and still desired. And once you've tasted even a glimpse of it, ordinary affection starts to feel hollow. Because how can surface-level connection satisfy a soul that has met its shadow? The truth is, the more civilized we become, the deeper these fantasies go underground. We call them shame. We call them sin. We call them bad thoughts. But they're none of those things. They're messages from the unconscious, reminders of everything you've lost in trying to become acceptable. That's why people are addicted to what breaks them. It's not self-destruction. It's spiritual excavation. We fall for danger because danger strips away pretense. When someone looks at you and sees the truth you've been hiding, it's terrifying. But it's also the only time you feel alive. And that's what the shadow feeds on. It's not darkness for the sake of evil. It's darkness that demands integration. Jung believed that the only way to become whole is to face what you most fear about yourself. That means looking directly at your forbidden fantasies, not acting on them, not shaming them, but understanding what they're trying to tell you. Because until you do, they'll keep controlling you from the dark. The first fantasy teaches one thing, that surrender and strength are not opposites. They're two sides of the same truth. And when you deny one, you weaken both. The second forbidden fantasy isn't about being taken. It's about taking, not physically, but emotionally. The fantasy of possession. The quiet hunger to own someone so completely that they stop being a separate being and become an extension of your own psyche. You've felt it before. That obsessive need to know what they're doing, who they're thinking of, whether you still live in their mind when you're not around. It's not love. It's psychological control, dressed up as care. Carl Jung said, "Where love reigns, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, their love is lacking." But the human mind is rarely balanced enough to separate the two. We say we want love, but we crave power, disguised as intimacy. To be wanted so deeply that the other person loses themselves in us. It feels intoxicating. It feels like safety, validation, victory. But it's also the shadow's second mask. This fantasy begins innocently. You fall for someone, you share time, you feel connection. But soon, the mind starts to whisper. Will they leave? Do they love me the same way? What if I lose them? The unconscious doesn't tolerate uncertainty, so it creates control. Subtle emotional games, silent expectations, manipulation that feels like devotion. You want to be the center of their world because being forgotten feels like death to the ego. That's the dark core of this fantasy, the desire to erase separation. You don't want love, you want to merge, to possess, to dominate emotionally so completely that the other person's reactions, thoughts, and attention orbit only you. And when they pull away, it feels like withdrawal. Because you're not addicted to them. You're addicted to what they mirror inside you. The second forbidden fantasy reveals your hidden thirst for power in love. You want to be the sun they revolve around, not because you're arrogant, but because your shadow equates control with safety. Somewhere in childhood, someone made you feel replaceable. So now, love becomes proof that you're irreplaceable. Jung described this as projection, the process where you cast your own inner wounds onto another. That's what happens here. You don't love the person. You love the version of yourself you see through their eyes. Their affection becomes your validation. Their withdrawal becomes rejection. Their indifference becomes abandonment. And slowly, your mind turns love into war. When they start pulling back, you panic. You text more, you call more, you analyze every word. But what you're really doing is chasing your own reflection, the image of yourself you felt when they adored you. That's why breakups hurt more than loneliness. You're not losing a person. You're losing the mirror that made you feel like you existed. That's the second forbidden fantasy, emotional possession. And everyone has it, even the ones who say, I'm not controlling. Control doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's withdrawal. Sometimes it's the refusal to let someone truly know how much power they have over you. The shadow loves control because it fears rejection. It whispers, if I own them, they can't abandon me. But Jung warned that whatever you repress becomes your destiny. When you deny your need for control, you unconsciously attract people who feed it. The emotionally unavailable, the mysterious, the cold, because they force your shadow to wake up and chase what it can't hold. That's why obsession feels romantic. It activates your shadow. The push, the pull, the waiting, the wanting, they all recreate the emotional chaos your psyche is addicted to. And deep down, you don't want peace. You want intensity. You want to feel consumed and consuming. There's something darkly satisfying about being needed, about watching someone depend on your presence. It makes you feel powerful, desired, important. But Jung would say, it's not love until you can let them go. Because the true test of love is freedom. And freedom terrifies the shadow. You want to believe you can love without ownership, But part of you still wants to be worshipped, still wants to matter more than they should allow you to. That's the human contradiction, craving to be loved unconditionally, while fearing that unconditional love would make you lose control. So you alternate between pushing and pulling, between silence and confession, between dominance and submission. It's not because you're manipulative, it's because you're human. And no one ever taught you how to love without trying to control. The shadow's second fantasy is the illusion that power can replace intimacy. But the more control you have, the less love survives. Because love breathes in vulnerability, in the risk of loss, in the willingness to not be needed. But your mind doesn't care about that. It wants certainty. It wants to own. So you cling. You argue. You test. You wait for their attention to prove you're still worthy of it. And every time they pull away, the fantasy deepens. Because pain is still a connection. If they can still hurt you, they still exist in you. That's the cruel truth Jung tried to reveal. You mistake emotional pain for love because it keeps the illusion alive. The shadow will rather suffer than face the emptiness of letting go. You'll say it's passion. You'll call it destiny. But underneath, it's addiction. And the moment you see that clearly, something shifts. The craving doesn't vanish, but it loses its control. You realize that wanting someone entirely is another way of saying you've lost touch with your own wholeness. The second forbidden fantasy teaches one painful lesson. You can't possess another person without losing yourself. Because every time you try, your shadow wins. The third forbidden fantasy is the most dangerous one, because it doesn't crave another person. It craves the darkness itself. It's not about control or surrender anymore. It's about fascination, the desire to touch what you've been told to stay away from. The fantasy of being desired by what could destroy you. Carl Jung said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." That's what this fantasy is. The need to feel both divine and damned at once. The quiet curiosity that draws you toward what your mind calls sin. It's not rebellion for pleasure. It's rebellion for truth. Everyone has felt it, the attraction to something or someone who feels wrong. The forbidden, the taboo, the dangerous. You tell yourself to stop. You remind yourself of your values. But a voice deeper than logic keeps whispering, just once. Because this fantasy isn't about breaking rules. It's about breaking illusions. When you repress a part of yourself long enough, it doesn't die. It evolves. It starts wearing masks that trick you. It shows up as the person you can't resist, the situation you shouldn't be in, the thought that makes your heart race and your stomach turn. It doesn't matter how spiritual or moral you are. The unconscious doesn't care about morality. It only seeks balance. So when you live your life in the light, kind, polite, controlled, your shadow begins to crave the opposite. You want to see how it feels to be the villain for once, to stop explaining, to stop pleasing, to stop pretending to be good, because goodness, when forced, becomes its own prison. That's the third fantasy, being devoured by what you fear most, and yet wanting it. This is why the pure are drawn to the corrupt, why innocence finds fascination in danger. It's not hypocrisy, it's compensation. Your psyche is trying to make you whole again. The forbidden calls to you not because you're broken, but because you're incomplete. You've been taught that darkness is evil. Jung would say, no, it's essential. The things you suppress, your rage, your lust, your cruelty, your vanity, they don't vanish when ignored. They wait. They test your strength by tempting you. They ask you to meet them without judgment. That's why this fantasy feels so intoxicating. It's not just lust. It's longing to be recognized by the one force you've always feared, your own shadow. When something dark desires you, it makes you feel chosen, seen, as if even your flaws are worthy of worship. It's terrifying and divine at the same time. You start confusing pain with passion, the thrill with connection. You start believing that the one who can hurt you most must be the one who understands you deepest. And that's the trap. The shadow doesn't want love. It wants reflection. It wants to see how much truth you can handle before you break. This is why so many are drawn to people who awaken their chaos, the ones who feel like storms, who make you lose your balance, who make you question who you are. They're not your destiny. They're your mirrors. They show you the parts of you you've never dared to look at. You tell yourself, I can change them. I can heal them. But in reality, they're healing you by forcing you to meet your darkness through them. The attraction to destruction is never random. It's the psyche's way of saying, you've lived too long in denial. The third forbidden fantasy is the fantasy of corruption, wanting to be ruined beautifully, to feel so consumed that even pain feels sacred, to fall into someone's darkness and find a strange peace there, because at least it's real. You'll never admit it publicly. You'll never write it down. But you felt it. The thrill of what you shouldn't want. The calm that follows surrender. The forbidden that feels more honest than anything you've ever confessed. Jung warned that if you deny the existence of evil, it will take control of you. But if you face it, it becomes part of your power. That's the truth hidden inside this fantasy. You're not supposed to act on it. You're supposed to understand it. To recognize that the part of you drawn to darkness isn't sinful. It's the missing half of your humanity. When you integrate it, something shifts. You no longer chase the forbidden to feel alive. You understand it's already inside you. The darkness doesn't tempt you anymore because you've made peace with it. You've stopped pretending to be pure. You've become whole. The third fantasy teaches that to be fully human You must meet every part of yourself, the saint, the sinner, the destroyer, the healer. And when you finally stop running from your shadow, it stops controlling you. That's when desire transforms into awareness. Obsession becomes peace. Fear becomes understanding. Because in truth, every forbidden fantasy is just a message from your unconscious, whispering, "You can't heal what you refuse to see." And once you see it, clearly, painfully, honestly, your fantasies no longer own you. You own them. That's when the shadow bows to you. And for the first time, you are free. If this video spoke to something you've always felt but never said, remember, your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you still waiting to be understood. If you found truth in these words, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who hides their fire behind their calm. And subscribe to Psychatic for more explorations into the hidden side of the mind. And tell me in the comments, which of these 3 forbidden fantasies lives quietly inside you?